All right, welcome to the pop art tutorial. Now, pop art was this trendy artwork that emerged back in the mid-1950s in Britain, and then later on in the late 50s it became more popular in the United States. But it was one of the major art movements of the 20th century. It was seen everywhere. You would see it on product boxes, cans of food. It was on, most of it was seen in comic books. Just this whole technique and this style of art and the way they created it, it just totally took off. But pop art went away, and then now it's just came back all of a sudden and started to become more of this trendy type of artwork again, or has this sort of vintage look to it that looks kind of cool. And it's seen in magazines and posters, and there's a lot more tutorials on it now and how to do it in Photoshop. And I wanted to include a video on this course to show you one version of it anyway. And special thanks to Melissa Clifton for some help and some tips on how to actually create this effect. If you would like to take this effect a little bit further, check out Melissa's website at melissaclifton.com. And I'll show the domain on the screen right here so you can write that down. But go check out her website for some more Photoshop tutorials on things like that. So it's a really cool website. All right, so let's take a look at what we have here. Here's the final image of the pop art, and I've created this using a photograph of this woman here. And the files that we will be using during this tutorial, you can find that in the pop art folder inside the project files folder. You see I have the stock image here. I also have a pop art color file right here that will actually give you the colors that we will be using, and colors that look pretty good when it comes to pop art. These are very good colors to go by. If you use these colors, then you can go back and change them or change the shades of them later on. But it might be a good idea if you're just starting, or if you've never created any type of pop art before. You can just go ahead and use this little color sample file here, and that will guide you. And we also have the final image right here. But what I'm going to do first is just move this image out of the way, and I'm going to keep my pop art colors file open, and it might be a good idea to just double click and open up that colors file. And then what I'm going to do is start off on the stock image right here. The very first thing you're going to want to do is remove the background behind the person that you will be turning into pop art. So what I'm going to do first is double click on this background layer, and let's just give it a name here. I'll call it original. And what I'll do is make another new layer and drag that layer below it. And I'm going to call this background. There we go. And then I'll go over to the toolbar and select the pen tool. And then what I'll do here is I'll select the zoom tool and move in and start to create a path around the foreground here. And just remember to include all the areas that you want to turn into pop art. I'll click right here, and then I'll come all the way down to the bottom and click right here. Scroll over to this side, click and up, and I'm just going to create this path here around the hair. And as soon as I get all the way around the foreground of this woman here, what I'll do is connect it to where I started the path by clicking on that point, and that will create the entire path. Now what I'll do is zoom out, and then I will right-click inside the foreground or inside the path here, and I'll select Make Selection. And then I'll keep the feather radius at 0, and I'll make sure Anti-Aliased is checked, and I'll go ahead and click OK. There we go. And let's make sure that we are on the original layer right here. And what I'll do is inverse this selection. So I'll come up here to Select and Inverse right here. So this way we are selecting just the background, and then I'll press the Delete key on the keyboard. There we go. I'll come up here to Select and deselect. Great. Next, what I think I'll do, because she is a brunette, I might brighten her hair just a little bit, because you can see if we don't do that, the hair is going to be just a little bit too dark when we apply this halftone pattern texture to the image. You can see I want to be able to see just a little bit of the hair. So what we can do is make sure that original layer is activated, and I can come up here to Image, Adjustments, and down here to Shadow Highlight. And then I can turn up the amount for the shadows and brighten that hair just like that. You see that? This is before and this is after. And by doing this, this will add a little bit more detail to the halftone pattern that we will be creating in just a moment. But I like this. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And then what I'll do is duplicate this original layer by dragging it to the new layer icon to make a copy of it. And let's just call this black and white. And then let's come over here to Image, Adjustments, and select Desaturate to remove all the color in this image. Perfect. All right, now what we're going to do is apply the halftone texture effect to this layer, but we're going to do it in another image. I want you to come over to the Layers palette and right-click on the black and white layer, and I want you to select Duplicate Layer right here. Then when the Duplicate Layer dialog comes up, down here where it says Document, I want you to select New. And then go ahead and click OK, and you should see a new document appear on the screen with a duplicate of that layer. All right, now what we're going to do is apply the threshold image adjustment to this image to get it down to 2 colors. So first, let's come up here to Image, Adjustments, and select Threshold. And what I'll do is just go ahead and zoom into the image so I can see this just a little bit closer here. And what you want to do is move this little white slider here at the bottom of the threshold and focus on the details of the face. So if you look here, the eyes and the ridge of the nose and the lips, you really want to focus on those areas. You don't want to go down too far like this and just get the eyes. You want to make sure that you get all the nice facial details. Something like this. Now that looks pretty good. I'll press the space bar on the keyboard to get the hand tool, and I can just browse around here and check this out. I'll also focus on her hair at the top here because we did brighten that up. And if I back that off a little bit, I could probably get more white in the hair. Just keep in mind that where we see white is where color will be. And so I'll lower this down. I'm going to go ahead and just click OK, and we can zoom out here. Perfect. Now, if you zoom into the image real close, you can see after we've applied that threshold, we have the edges of the image here are a little bit pixelated, or at least along the details of the areas here between the white and the black. So what we can do is soften those areas. This is something that we're probably going to have to do in order for the halftone dot effect to look right. So let's come over here to Filter, Blur, and select the Gaussian Blur option, and enter somewhere around 1.5, 1.8. That'll be just fine, just to give it a little bit of softening there, and go ahead and click OK. And I'll zoom out. Okay, this is looking perfect. All right, now we're ready to apply the halftone texture to this image, but we must convert a couple modes here in Photoshop before we do that. Let's come over here to Image, Mode, and I want you to select Grayscale, which will discard all the color information. Go ahead and click on Discard, and then come back up here to Image, Mode, and select Bitmap. Flatten all layers, click OK, and the bitmap options will appear right here. Now for the output, I want you to set this to 300 dpi if you're working with the same image that we are in this tutorial. Now if you have a lower resolution image, maybe something around 72 dpi or 150 dpi, go ahead and change that output resolution right here depending on the resolution of your image. Now for the method, you must set this to halftone screen. Now by default, it might be 50% threshold. If it is, just go ahead and set that to halftone screen and then click OK. Now for the halftone screen options, if you're working with the same image that I'm working with right here, for the frequency, enter in 20, angle 45, and make sure that the shape is set to round. And then go ahead and click OK. And there you go. Check it out. And you can zoom in real close and take a look at that pattern. All right, before we move on, we must convert this back to RGB so we can get it over to our original image over here. So let's come up here to Image, Mode, and select Grayscale. Go ahead and click OK when the grayscale options come up. And then back over here to Image, Mode, and select RGB Color. There you go. Now what I want you to do is come over to the Layers palette and right-click on the background layer, and I want you to select Duplicate Layer from here. You can also come up to the menu at the very top right of the Layers palette and select Duplicate Layer from there. It's going off the screen there, but this is it looks a little bit different in CS3. If you're using CS2, it's a little tiny button with a little arrow on it, but it's pretty much the same thing. What I'm going to do is right-click on this background layer and select Duplicate Layer. And down here where it says Document, you need to select the project image that we're working on. So in this case, we're working with the stock image here. So I'll select that and go ahead and click OK. And then I'll click OK once more. And here is the result. You can see that it's directly placed this copy right over the image. Look at that. And to get the background back behind this dots layer here, well, what we can do is over here on the Layers palette, I want you to hold down the Alt key on the keyboard, and that's the Option key on the Mac, and come right between the dots and the black and white layer here. Just move the hand tool right in between those two. Hold down the Alt key, and you'll see the icon, or you'll see the hand change to this little icon with an arrow on it. As soon as you see that, go ahead and click the mouse, and you should see the transparent background behind here. And then what we can do is click on the background layer, and I can also just go over here and close this image because we no longer need this. But over here on the Pop Art Colors palette, what we can do is select the background color. I can select the eyedropper tool, click on the background color, and if you've noticed, I've labeled all these for you so you know what they are. But I'll click on the background color to sample that color. And then over here on the toolbar, I'll select the paint bucket and then click in the transparent area to fill it in with that background color. Look at that. All right, now the painting has now begun. This is the fun part, folks. Let's come over to the Layers palette, and I'll click on the topmost layer, and then I'll make a new layer on top of that, and let's call this Skin. This is the layer that we will be painting the skin color on. And then what I'll do, over here on the toolbar, select the eyedropper tool and sample the color for the skin, which is right here. I'll click on that, and you can see the foreground change to that color. And then I'll select the brush tool. But before I do that, I think I'll zoom in a little bit closer. There we go. I'll select the brush tool. And then what we must do, before we start to paint on this layer here, we must set the blending options to multiply. Okay, so set the blending mode for this layer to multiply. Come over to her face and start to paint just like this. Now we're going to want to avoid the eyes and also the lips because we have a separate color for those few features there. So I'm just going to paint on her face here just like this. I can paint over the nose, and I can zoom in if I need to, just like this. And to make it a little more helpful, what you can do is see this black and white layer right here. You can make that invisible, and you can see the original layer through it, or through the skin layer here. And you can paint along her face like this if you prefer to do it this way, so you can see exactly where all the skin is. But it may not be necessary because some of the areas are so dark that you might not see those shadowed areas anyway. So, but what I'm going to do is just go in here and adjust the brush size and start painting away. Now, it doesn't have to be perfect because, you know, back in the 50s, it was sort of this, you know, it was artistic. And so we have to sort of keep that in mind. I can leave some white in the face there if I want. Now, we're getting close to the lips here, so I want to make sure that I'm not painting over the lips. So I'll just zoom in here and paint this around just like this. And let me go ahead and try that one more time. There we go. Get up here around the eyes. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the color for the lips. So I'll make a new layer, and I'll call this layer Lips. And I'll set the blending mode to multiply. And then over on the toolbar, I'll select the eyedropper tool. I'll sample the color here for the lips. Go ahead and click on that. I'll select the brush tool. And then what I can do is make this black and white layer here invisible and zoom in just a little bit closer, and I will just ride this lip color here over just like this. I'll completely fill this in just like this, and I can go back or I can make this brush just a little bit smaller to get into the tighter areas like this. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect. I mean, this is art. This portion of it anyway. And then I'll turn this back on so we can see the result. Look at that. All right, let's move on to the eyes. And I might actually move those lips around if I want to, or I can just fill the rest of that in. And I'll zoom in here to the eyes. Let's make a new layer for that. Call this eyes, easy enough. I'll select the eyedropper tool and we'll just click on the eye color right here. I'll select the paintbrush, and before I start to paint, I'll set this blending mode to multiply, and I'll come in here and start to paint on the eyes. And for a really cool effect, what you can do is almost paint outside of the eye a little bit so we can see that color outside of there. See that? And I'll move over to the other one because it is really dark and make things a little bit more artistic there. Look at that. And we have her ear over here with some jewelry, and we can go ahead and create the colors for those as well. And we can start to paint some hair color here. So I'll make a new layer for that and call this hair. I'll select the eyedropper tool, sample the hair. Now she's really a brunette and we're painting with this yellow color, but we can go back and change the color of this later on if we want to. But I'm just going to come in here, and before I do that, I'll set this to multiply. And I'm just going to go in here and paint just like this. Just these little areas here of white that are seeping through. And you can see how important it is to make sure that if you do have a brunette, to lighten her hair as much as possible. That way it becomes more visible when you get to this part here. So, and I can just come along here, just get the edge there like that. Something like that. There we go. Looks pretty good. I can go back on the skin layer and we can touch up a little bit more here. I'm just going to go ahead and fill all this in because we do have some clothing here. And I'll just go ahead and take advantage of that. And hopefully that will come through. Look at that. Now I'm not sure I will be including all this in the portrait here, but I might crop the image. So, okay, that looks good. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. There we go. And to make this clothing stand out a little bit more, I can start to paint on this side. And I'm not getting really fussy with this. I'm just doing this really quickly so it retains some of that artistic feel to it, especially around the edges, like right here. There we go. Let's take a look. All right. And I can come over here, and we don't have that much jewelry, but I'm just going to name this, and I can select the color for the jewelry right here, and I'll zoom in. We can see if we have a little bit there going on, and I'll lower that down. And let's make sure that's on multiply. There we go. Something like this, but you get the idea. Every image is going to be different. You're going to have some areas show through more than others, and there you go. So that looks pretty hot. Now what I'm going to do is crop this image down. So I'll select the crop tool, and what I'll do is just pull these sides in here. And I'm just cutting out some of that outside space there and create myself a little composition here. And like, you can use this for a poster, or you can, I'm just cropping this down to make things a little bit tighter so the focus is more on her face. And what I'll do after this is press the Enter key on the keyboard to confirm that. And there we have our completed pop art. Look at that. So have fun with that. Use the pop art color file here that I've included, and you can also, I can also make a new layer above these other layers and fill it in and choose multiply. Over here on image adjustments, hue and saturation, with that color layer, with this layer here that I've filled it in with the background color, I can adjust the hue, and we can sort of create more like a vintage type look to it. So you're not just stuck with those colors that we've chosen, although, you know, they're very, these colors right here are very traditional. So you might want to leave it like that. That's fine. But you can also apply a color layer above it and play around with that. So there you go. Now you know how to create some pop art in Photoshop. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial and got a lot out of it. And we'll see you guys on the next video.